Kia ora and welcome. My name is Angela Strange. I'm a councillor at the Waikato Regional Council, and today I have the privilege of hosting a panel discussing transport and climate action within the Waikato region. We're focusing on local action and what we can do to help lower emissions within the Waikato. I have the privilege of being on the panel alongside many distinguished people. Next up we have Professor Mike Duke from the University of Waikato, who's going to talk to us about how engineering and electric bikes and that sort of thing will contribute to lower emissions. Over to you, Mike. Thanks.
Kia ora, and thanks, Angela. So yeah, I'm an engineer. So I've been working in electric vehicles for about 25 years, starting with solar racing cars. We used to race these vehicles across Australia and all around the world. And it was all about low emission, efficient vehicles. We then sort of moved on to, before electric vehicles became mainstream, we moved on to long range commuter vehicles, which is sort of ideal for New Zealand. And at the moment, we're working on hybrid electric ferries, passenger ferries for New Zealand, and in particular, autonomous agricultural electric and hybrid vehicles. So it's very much a techie background that I'm bringing. But what's really interesting is when I'm sort of talking about electric vehicles is that they have been around for over 100 years, and we're probably in what we call the 5th EV period at the moment. And hopefully we've got to what we call the tipping point where we're going to see a lot more use of electric vehicles. And I'm not going to focus on hydrogen. There's a bit of a, hydrogen and a battery, and I would say competition, I'd say, but I'm going to focus on battery electric vehicles in particular. And one of the reasons why we're seeing so many electric vehicles at the moment, I think probably everyone's aware, it's actually the battery technology, the lithium battery technology that's meant that we can get rid of something called range anxiety, which is very important for countries like New Zealand, where you have vehicles now that can have a range of 600 kilometres. So if you're travelling the long distances between towns in New Zealand, you can do that quite easily. And now we also have fast charging options, up to 350 kilowatt charges, 350 kilometre range, and you can charge within a 10-minute charge. So the technology is the thing that's made the electric vehicles really work. And actually, in the last couple of months, 20% of all the new vehicles sold in New Zealand were at some sort of electric variant, either fully electric or hybrid. So it's looking good if you're into electric vehicles. And the other thing that's going to be really good about them for New Zealand in particular is that the fact that you can have a network of charging stations all around New Zealand. You're just not relying on going to a petrol station. You can have what we call a distributed network, which means you can go to various places and charge up. And New Zealand is 80% renewable electricity. So it means as we move to electric vehicles, we start charging from renewable sources, we're reducing our emissions. So potentially it looks really good. A few caveats we have to be wary of is if you're using an electric vehicle, then you could be trying to go and charge up somewhere, and 350 kilowatts to charge up your EV is an awful lot of power, which just isn't going to be available everywhere. An example, we drove one of our electric vehicles in 2011 from Auckland to Bluff, and we went, let's go down through the Caitlin's, which is a beautiful part of New Zealand, and there was no charging. When we stopped at a cafe to charge up, we basically switched off the cafe. So it's not perfect. There's going to be a lot of infrastructure to make it work. But the real one that I think is a disruptive technology that can have a massive impact on our environment and our emissions is e-bikes. So it's a disruptive technology that we should embrace. And by taking the lithium battery technology and putting them onto e-bikes, we've suddenly created a completely new and disruptive form of transport, which I have fully embraced. My whole family has embraced it. And when we travel now, we travel out on our e-bikes as much as we possibly can, taking vehicles off the road. And I would say that this is revolutionary, in particular because you've got the range. When you go out on your e-bike, we can actually get up to 200 kilometre range on an e-bike if you're pedaling. And of course, the health benefits are now well known, that if you put people onto their e-bikes and start cycling, you've got great health benefits. And I know this. I actually cycled with a friend from Hamilton to Wanganui a few months ago in the winter time. And by the end of it, we started off really a bit cranky. By the end of it, we felt really fit and healthy, and we got a lot of exercise. So you can take the petrol cars off the roads, you can reduce congestion, we can reduce emissions, less threat, less noise, a quieter, safer environment by introducing e-bikes and embracing them. And of course, it's something that's already happening. The growth of e-bikes has been exponential and is outstripping ordinary pedal bikes. It's a really good way that we could affect our emissions and our health in our local environment. So we should take advantage of it. Unfortunately, even in the Hamilton cycle plan, it doesn't even mention electric. So everything, we need to address this in our plans, and we need to have in particular a really good cycle network, which is local and national. Hamilton's okay on it, but it's nowhere near enough. I think we have an opportunity to embrace a disruptive technology, make a big difference, and we need to work on it. And one of the key things is safety. One of the reasons why you don't cycle is because you're worried about the safety of cycling. And we have to do two things. One is we have to make safe cycle areas for the increasing number of e-bikes. And the other thing is we need to have a program to change the culture, where at the moment, people, we'd have a very poor culture in New Zealand about drivers' attitude towards cyclists. And we need to address that. And then, of course, the infrastructure that goes with it, charging station for e-bikes, secure lock-up areas as well. So I believe that e-bikes are a disruptive technology that will make a significant difference to our emissions and the whole way that we deal with transport. And I would like to encourage the use of them and the planning for them. So that's my statement. So thanks for that. And I'd like to hand over to Kiri Crossland, who will talk about electric vehicles.
Kia ora everybody. I've just got a couple of slides to share, so I'll just get those set up now. Can I just get a thumbs up from the panel? Can people see that? Awesome. Great. Kia ora everybody. Like Mike said, my name is Kiri Crossland and I'm a sustainable transport planner with MR Cagney. And I'm really excited to be on this panel today because I've grown up in the Waikato. I studied here and it's great just to be able to talk about how we can make the climate change issue local. And I think when we think about transport, we shouldn't think about it in isolation. We should think about where we want to go and why we want to get there. We don't just get in the car or get on the bus for the sake of it. Transport is what enables us to live a good life. And as it says on the slide, I see transformational change coming in the transport sector. We need to have it if we're going to have a low carbon transport system. But I think this is a really good opportunity to transition to a transport system which is equitable and efficient as well as low carbon. So I'll talk a little bit about the current transport system in the Waikato and my vision for the future of transport, and then the values I think that will help us to get there. So here are a few examples of the transport options we have available in the Waikato at the moment. I think at this point, most of us agree we want less of these things here, petrol and diesel cars and other vehicles, and we want more of these things on the right, trains, buses, active modes, and electric vehicles. I've seen a lot of attention on this one here, electric cars, and I agree that there's a place for electric cars in our low carbon future, but I don't think that they're like a magic bullet that's going to solve all our problems, and they're certainly not going to help us transition to a low carbon future in a way that's equitable or efficient. There is legitimate need for some people to keep using cars, such as disabled people or tradies, like you can't take all your tools on the bus at the moment. So there's definitely electric cars in our future, but not everybody will be driving a car all the time. This is a little comparison between petrol and diesel cars and electric cars. And as you can see, the only problem that electric vehicles really solve when it comes to the problems we see with petrol cars is it reduces the operational emissions, so they're a lot cleaner at the tailpipe and they're a lot quieter. But the problem with this, or like the trade-off, is that electric vehicles require some pretty intensive mining, as Mike mentioned, for the lithium batteries, which is like an emerging technology which will make electric vehicles more efficient. But they also, there's not enough lithium in the world to replace every single car we have at the moment with an electric car. So we need some sort of change. And I think it's a good idea to rename this table. problems with car-centric planning. So even if we all have electric cars, we're still going to have urban sprawl, we're still going to have congestion, you'll be sitting in traffic in an electric car. So maybe you don't have exhaust coming out your tailpipe, but you're still wasting time, and we're still taking over public space, and it's still going to be expensive to maintain our roads. In comparison, electric bikes, regular bikes, walking, they have almost no environmental impact or very little. So transforming the way we think about transport planning to better cater to these modes is a much more efficient way of managing this transition. So what are the opportunities? We have the opportunity right now to create a transport system that's good for people's health, facilitates social interactions, and enables everyone to access everything they need for a good life. So we can create a transport system that secures the health of people and the environment, and everyone still gets where they need to go. And I see 3 values as guiding our decision making and our investment if this is what we're going to achieve. The first one is equity. At the moment, our transport system doesn't work for everyone. We need to put equity at the centre of our decision making and make sure that everyone has access to an affordable, high quality transport system, no matter who they are or where they need to go. At the moment, if you're a business person who works 9 to 5, you've got quite a few options. You can catch public transport, you can drive, but if you're a granny picking up your mokopuna from school, pretty much the only way you can get there is by car. We don't have options for people at the moment, and we don't have options for everyone. We also need to centre efficiency. So as we saw on the last slide, our current transport system has a lot of problems with it at the moment. If we just think about fixing climate change, we're not being very efficient. We have to undergo radical transformation, and this transformation shouldn't just be replacing one type of car with another, because otherwise in 10 years, we'll still be discussing the same problems. It's also important to put people at the centre of our decision-making and investment. Traditionally, traffic engineers have used the predict and provide approach, where a model spits out how many car movements can be expected from a development, and then we build a road to reflect that. But we know that humans are more complicated than that, and much more complex than a few pieces of data can ever capture. So when we're planning our transport system or planning developments or new roads or new transport systems, we should be thinking, who are the people who are going to travel and live here? Where do they want to go? Why do they want to get there? And how can we support them to make sustainable transport decisions? So I'll just return to this slide to sum up this little crash course into the sustainable transport system of the future. We need to undergo drastic transformation, but we need to do it in a way that enables everyone to have low carbon options. And this involves a lot more than electric cars. We need to double down into our investment into these modes here, public transport and active modes, while recognising that a small number of people will still need an electric car. I think that's pretty much everything I have to say. So now I'd like to pass on to Stuart from Bike Waikato, who will tell us a bit more.
Thank you, Kerry. That was really really interesting stuff, and there's so much alignment with the panel. I'm Stuart Penfold from Bike Waikato. We are a volunteer organisation. We're across the Waikato. We do a lot of work in Hamilton City, the Cambridge area, and also Waikato District. Quite a diverse sort of catchment, I suppose you could say. We obviously have the urban areas as well as the open spaces. We're a volunteer-run organisation. We have quite a diverse, I guess, set of skills in terms of who we are, including sort of planning and engagement, engineering and design, and communications. And that's really helpful for us to kind of get across the whole sort of engineering aspects of this, and also the social aspects of cycling. So our role is really to advocate for the community in terms of cycling. So that's for cycling infrastructure. We're basically looking to develop relationships with councils, the transport agency, engineering consultancies, and the community. We you know, we've grown out of Cycle Action Waikato. So I guess the organisation itself has been around for some time. I guess the last few years there's been a real step change. You know, there's a bit of a tipping point, and some would say we've kind of crossed that tipping point now. There's a lot of talk about technology. There's a lot of talk about e-bikes. We've had the global pandemic. We've had a lot of people using these open spaces, the road. There's been this sort of reallocation of the road space with families taking advantage of less cars on the road. And it's really showing that there's a real demand for safe cycling infrastructure / reallocation of road space, which is traditionally towards vehicles. We advocate. We also agitate as necessary. We have to. We've got quite a vocal membership base. Social media clearly can quite easily tip to that agitate kind of area, but we're obviously looking to balance things out. We're looking to affect change, and sometimes the agitation, if it goes too far, doesn't quite lead to productive outcomes. But it's still very, very useful because, as Mike quite clearly pointed out, there is a lot of there's a culture change I think that really needs to happen in New Zealand. There are unfortunately still a lot of examples where, for some reason, driver behaviour towards cyclists is undesirable, and I think there's a I think it's that reallocation of road space. You know, if we can kind of find a balance of providing safe infrastructure while still accounting for vehicles and those drivers who, for whatever reason, feel, I guess, impinged in their sort of day-to-day movements, then I think that's going to help everybody. Congestion. You know, if we're providing alternatives to driving for commuting, you know, if that's just your traditional leg-powered cycle, if you will, the acoustic version versus e-bikes, you know, if we're getting people out of cars, that helps the tradies who can't take their heavy plumbing tools or their skill saws or whatever. That's freeing up that road space for all people. It's quite interesting. Cargo bikes have become quite a thing at the moment, and there's a bit of a movement, especially in the UK, where those plumbers, you know, tradies are actually using cargo bikes. Generally, it helps if they're e-cargo bikes with all the gear. But I think there's a real opportunity in New Zealand to kind of push that cargo bike kind of area in terms of providing those alternatives to certain people. You know, it's I mean, I guess I could talk for hours about sort of what we're looking to do. We really are trying to act for the community, get people involved, work with different partners, work with funders. You know, it's the traditional funding model in New Zealand hasn't traditionally been very good for alternative travel modes. So really we're looking to take advantage of those sort of high-level government policies and really sort of advocate and agitate to really try to get some funding there for safe cycling infrastructure, and encourage more cycling. You know, I mean, there are a lot of kids out there who struggle, and parents. You know, the parents don't want the kids driving on the road if it's unsafe. So we're really looking for that infrastructure again. So that's me. I'll just hand you over to Peter Boss, who is with the Living Streets, I believe. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. My name's Peter Harry Boss, and I'm here representing Living Streets at Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. Much of what I'm going to be saying comes from the Living Streets Aotearoa website. I'll start with saying we're very lucky living in Hamilton. We've got good political leadership and making good comments about climate change. And in the area of transport, there's a very good and embedded understanding of Vision Zero. So I'll just, Living Streets' interest is in the rights of pedestrians and benefits for walking, because walking is the first mode of transport. Our advocacy is on promoting walk-friendly communities. We want more people walking and enjoying public space, to be they young or old, fast or slow, whether walking, commuting, shopping, between appointments, or out on the street for exercise, for leisure or for pleasure. Living Street's vision is more people to walk more often. Living Streets works to develop walking friendly communities throughout New Zealand and to promote the social, environment and healthy and economic benefits of walking as a means of transport, recreation. We emphasise the relationship between walking and access to public transport. Walking is a significant part of climate change and health solutions. Our objectives: to promote walking as healthy, accessible, cheap, sociable, environmentally friendly means of transport, recreation. To promote social and economic benefits of pedestrian-friendly communities. To work for walk-friendly communities with improved access and conditions for walkers, pedestrians, runners and children walking to school. To advocate for greater representative walkers and pedestrians' concerns in land use and transport planning and urban design. And to raise the profile of walking and the importance of people meeting face to face. And lastly, to foster consideration for people with special mobility needs. So I'll end that there and pass it on to Angela.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, so I'm a councillor at Waikato Regional Council representing the Hamilton constituency. And I'm just, I have the privilege of chairing our Public Transport Committee. And we work in with Hamilton City Council and the other councils within the Waikato region. And for me, it's really important that we take people on this journey with us, and that's members of the public and other politicians. The talk about climate and lower emissions has really started to give us some momentum, and it's I'm trying to normalise the conversation within, you know, the meetings that we have and with other politicians. And within the Waikato, we have such a diverse region. You've got your bigger urban, your smaller urban, and then your really rural communities. So, you know, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And within the public transport space, you know, we can have our buses, we can have our trains, which meet the needs in those urban centres, but there are more isolated communities as well. So part of our plan moving forward is to work in with community transport, which is already, you know, running shuttles for health and other appointments, and if they have spare seats, seeing if we can get people on board their shuttle buses, and yeah, really cooperating within the region. One thing that we are really doing is looking at how within the region we can take politicians along the journey with us, and each of their own areas look at how they can reduce transport emissions. So we're looking at, you know, passenger transport and also freight as well. So we've just recently formed a transport emissions reductions working group. And it's made up of representation from our regional transport committee. So it reflects the metro spatial area of Hamilton, Waipa and Waikato district, as well as a rural territorial authority and Waka Kotahi as well. And what we'll be using in this group is the decarbonisation tool, just to show which actions we can take, which levers we can pull that will really make the most difference. And we've heard from the other speakers today about the difference that walking, cycling, electric cars can make. And I'm keen to also showcase, you know, even just small changes in the interim as well, carpooling, car sharing, and all those other modes as well. If we can not compete with each other, but complement each other as well. At the Regional Council, we have the opportunity to submit to other councils, district plans and development plans, and yeah, we really advocate for that land use and transport to be linked up, and you know, higher density housing along key transport corridor routes, you know, smaller community transport hubs, community hubs that people they don't have to go into the CBD necessarily, but they can everything accessible within a short distance as well. Working from home, as well as potentially, you know, e-bikes and e-car, electric vehicle ownerships. Okay. I also want to touch on equity as well. We heard from Kitty about an equitable transport plan moving forward, and you know, that covers people with disabilities, and it also covers lower income families as well. So low or free public transport would help, and I know there's petitions out there at the moment to look at how we could make public transport more affordable for people moving forward as well. Yeah, I think that's about, I'll leave it there for that. But there was, and I'll bring it round to a discussion with the other panelists. Yeah, there was a lot of talk about behaviour change and a culture change within our communities. I was wondering if how we might best enable that culture change and that behaviour change. If anyone had any thoughts on that from the panel.
Well, I think it's got to be done. I mean, I'm sure Stuart's got the opinion, but it's got to be done at the school level. I mean, we can have government initiatives and campaigns, but it's the schools where you've got, I mean, I think this isn't a short-term fix, this is a long-term culture change. So that's where I start. Yeah,
that's a good point, Mike. I think, yeah, it's got at the school level. I mean, I'm lucky enough to live in Pirongia, and a very relatively small percentage of children right to school, and I think starting at that school level and making it easy for parents and making them feel comfortable about being able to either ride to school with their children, or just as they get older, actually allowing the kids to ride to school themselves, and just making it normal, you know, making it a sort of normal thing. And it starts at that small level, you know, just that. I mean, Pirongia is obviously a small town, but you can do it in the cities. But I mean, having that relatively short distance to school, hopefully short distance, and then that can change. The other thing, maybe I'll just add to that, is that sort of maybe wider educational or let's say transport agency. I mean, there's a lot of driver education around, say, seatbelts, drink driving, that sort of thing. And I think there really needs to be a push towards sharing the road. Let's look after each other. It's not just people in cars using the road. There's other parties. So I think there's an opportunity for, you know, central government to actually sort of widen their driver education.
Yeah, good point, Stu. Peter, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's continuous improvement, where there's a lot of small changes. Quick change can get resistance, but if there's continuous and a continuous conversation, it is a political. It does take a lot of political leadership. We've seen that with biking and with the safer speeds when the politicians support it. And with Vision Zero, we've seen that once the politicians picked it up and said we want to do this. It wasn't a switch that the traffic engineers wanted to do it, but within a few years it became quite embedded. And in Hamilton, it's whenever we discuss transport, Vision Zero does come up, and that is and that's the start point of the conversation. So it's continuous improvement. That's how I see it.
Yeah, Kitty, did you have any thoughts as well?
Yeah, Peter, I liked what you said about the quick opportunities, or opportunities for quick change. And I think that's something that we've seen tested in the Innovating Streets program that happened recently. It's an opportunity just to try something out. Like, they were all short-term things just to see if something would work. And I remember when it was announced, and particularly Ward Street in Hamilton, everybody said, wow, there's just going to be traffic everywhere. How will we survive? But we tested it, and the monitoring and evaluation that came out of that showed that there was no more than a 0.7 second delay across the network. So I think just doing stuff like that with really robust political leadership and robust community engagement, and just testing it out and giving it a go. Like, maybe it won't work, but maybe it will. And it's only through trying something new that we're going to be able to change our transport system.
Do you think it needs, because at the moment it's pretty much, if you hit someone on a bike with a car, there's not really much of a penalty. I mean, in other countries, if you hit a cyclist, you're in trouble. So do we need a law change, or is that, should we stick with the carrot or the stick in terms of making this happen, and education?
I think what Peter mentioned about Vision Zero is the way to go. Like, Vision Zero, it states that any death or serious injury on the road is unacceptable. And one of the main ways that you can prevent death and serious injury is through the design of the transport network. So we shouldn't have bikes right next to cars on the road going at 80 k's an hour. Like, why would you expect no injuries to happen? And we shouldn't have cycle lanes that go right behind angle parks where cars are going to reverse out onto them. Like, for example, on Ward Street, I've been backed out on a bike by a car. But with, like, if you redesign it and to reduce those conflict points between cyclists and cars, or cyclists and buses, you don't need a law, because those conflicts don't happen. So I think it's probably a big, like, multiple pronged approach with education, but also we should design the transport system so that there's no chance for people to get injured, even if somebody does make a mistake.
Yeah, good points, Kitty. Now, just on that safety and it's starting, that behaviour change starting in schools, it is that whole perception of safety, especially for those vulnerable users. How, Kitty, you talked about the infrastructure, reducing those conflict points. And there's always a challenge with funding and infrastructure change. So do you have any I don't know, suggestions, or how, I know Stuart, you talked about road reallocation. What is a more affordable way, to bring about that change for safety, for infrastructure moving forward? Stuart or Kitty?
Yeah, baby steps. I think. I mean, Kitty, I think your Ward Street example, I think communication is really key. Sort of communicating to the different users, I guess, of that space, what the intention of that project is, and I think that goes for any sort of I guess reallocation. So clear communication about what the project's trying to achieve, who it's trying to benefit, maybe making it clear. Say, for example, the classic, and no offence to any transport planners, but the classic 0.7 second delay, like, rather than just saying, hey, it's 0.7 seconds of a delay, putting that in kind of maybe real world kind of language to, say, mums and dads who might be driving their kids to school or whatever. And so, yeah, just kind of coming up with just putting a bit of effort into that kind of community engagement and communications, and not underestimating the power of that. So I think those sort of baby steps and those small community kind of scale reallocations are really helpful. It's just how, the implementation of those little projects is so key.
Yeah, you're so right, Stu. All the communication with people is so important, because if you just introduce a change and you're not explaining to people why and what benefits they might get out of it, like, it's no surprise that people are resistant. But I think when it comes to funding, there's quite a few opportunities. The long-term kind of view is, if we've got less cars on the road, then we're going to have a lot of money left over, because we're not going to be repairing the roads as much. Because cars and trucks are terrible for roads. Like, if we didn't have cars or trucks, we'd never have to repair the road. So if we've got less of them, then that's less money we have to spend on roads, and more money we can be spending on bike infrastructure and safety improvements. But until we get to that point, I think the biggest opportunity is introducing a congestion charge in city centres. And we've seen this, lots of examples of this overseas, where overnight they've introduced a congestion charge and the next day there's hardly any traffic, which is a great climate outcome because people have chosen to use a different mode. But the people who are like, nah, I don't care, like I'm just going to pay to drive, you can collect those funds and like hypothecate them or allocate them to a specific purpose. And one of those purposes could be investing in really good options for other people, or like alternative options for people who decide that they actually don't want to drive anymore. And I think that's in the short term, that's a way we can kind of get that jump start, which will enable us to put in the infrastructure, which will like start this big cycle where less and less people drive because it's more attractive to use the other modes and it will be more affordable. Like we spend so much money on cars at the moment and we never really question it. But as soon as we want to improve safety for bikers and walkers and improve public transport, all of a sudden we're asking, oh, where's the money going to come from?
Yeah, there's one issue with that is if you go back 20 years in London when they started that process, and I switched from trains to bikes to cycle to London. And when I did that, I literally had a whole cycle network map system that I could choose, and I could cycle in with almost no danger with traffic because they'd already set it up. What we're doing is the other way around. We're going to say, right, okay, you drive in. We won't be able to drive in unless you get a congestion charge, but we don't have the infrastructure. There's so many pinch points in Hamilton that are unsafe for cyclists that need to be sorted out. That needs to be done before you then put a congestion charge in. And I'm just talking from experience of seeing what happened in London. And when it happened, the amount of cyclists was unbelievable.
I can imagine.
There were just hundreds of us all over the place, and it became a really good like club to be in.
It sounds really positive. Just on, we've talked a little bit about the conflict between maybe cars and bikes. The conflict between other modes isn't so often talked about, and you know, sharing the space. I know we mentioned in our chat beforehand about conflict between walkers and bikes and e-bikes and scooters on footpaths, etc., etc. Peter, I'm wondering if you had any thoughts around, you know, from a walker's perspective, how other mode users can help them feel safe as they're walking.
Yeah, I would like to start a conversation about responsibility, and sort of responsibility increases with weight and speed. So it's not just about bikers, cars, trucks, runners, walkers. It's about if you're walking and somebody is running, then the runner is a guest, becomes a guest, and becomes more responsible, and that goes up as speed and weight goes up. So like a child riding a bike on the footpath, it's not safe for them to go onto the road, so we have to accept that. But then you get someone who's biking faster, and the threat they give, the responsibility should be seen as theirs, not the weaker or the pedestrian.
Yep.
So it's a question of etiquette. Would you say?
Yes. So the footpath is primary, the pedestrian's right of way, and everyone else is a guest. And the priority is the weaker has the I don't think the weak is the proper word we're supposed to use, but the more vulnerable has the right of way and the greater protection.
Yeah, good point. I know I've recently been out biking with my kids who range in age from 8 up to 12, and it's always that teaching them to be respectful of other users, ringing their bells if they don't have a bell, calling out, and slowing down as well as you're passing people. Often it's I don't know, I always tell them to keep left as well, but then you have the conflict of other users who don't keep left.
Traditionally pedestrians will go wander from left to right, it's leisure, It's not
Yeah.
it's not like the road where you've got strict rules.
Yeah.
So everyone else using the footpath really has to respect that they're a guest there, and the rules have been loosened a lot, and that's where a lot of Living Streets is trying to hang on to as much protection for the pedestrian as they can.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Yeah, just we've got a couple more minutes. I just wanted to talk on technology and autonomous cars. There has been some, you know, people say that it is coming, and in my sort of mind, you know, that possibly would add a little bit more congestion because they're constantly circling the city picking people up, but you know, everything could contribute to making transport lower climate, lower emissions. Does anyone have any thoughts or insights onto autonomous vehicles and where that technology may lead?
Well, we actually do research in that area, and it's definitely coming. I think this is one that it's very technically difficult to do. So we actually have PhDs in this area working on agricultural vehicles. The rules, there's a simple rule in currently with passenger vehicles, is that it always, for a safety aspect, it always defers back to the driver. Yeah. With agricultural vehicles, you can't do that. You actually have to be fully autonomous. So that adds an extra challenge. But the technology now is such that I don't think it's quite there yet, but within our lifetime, you will definitely see some autonomous vehicles on the road. But they don't have to be big, heavy, nasty machines. They could be quite efficient machines that are, you know, you get in and it will, like a little pod that will take you from A to B within a city. And that's the sort of thing that that is viable. In fact, we actually built a little pod a few years ago like that, which we tried out, and it was quite cool. But it's gonna take a while for that technology to have the confidence for people to get, you know, to meet the safety requirements, which are going to be absolutely, you know, one like the Tesla car that had the fatal crash. You know, you've got to dot every I and cross every T to make them viable from a safety perspective.
I think predictability is the key. So, I mean, as you know, like unpredictability is of driver behaviour, I guess, is it's such a massive hazard on the road. You know, you're not entirely sure what the driver's thinking and what they're going to do. So I think, you know, autonomous vehicles in urban areas, it's fine in theory as long as the technology is there if they're predictable. So if, you know, if there's a certain speed, if there are certain tracks, I think there's an opportunity for them in urban areas for sure. Yeah, because you could quite easily, well, maybe not quite easily, maybe that's not the right way of putting it, but I'm sure you could develop predictability into that technology.
Yeah, one of the problems with them is that a lot of the decision making or identification of objects is done using a technology called machine learning, which is pretty much a black box effect. So if someone got killed by an electric vehicle, and then you have to, how was that decision made for that vehicle to do what it did? And suddenly you're into an area of machines that are making decisions through a black box approach rather than you could actually trace back what happened. So that's, you just imagine the legal minefield that we're going to face with that. So anyone who thinks they're just going to come in and off we go, it's going to take a while to iron all these problems out.
I think you raised a really interesting point about the machine learning there, Mike. I'm not claiming to be an expert in autonomous vehicles, but as a transport planner, it is something I'm interested in. And I've seen some research coming out of the US, which kind of dives into the equity impacts of that machine learning, because most of like real technological experts and our code writers and stuff like that, they all tend to be like European men. Which means that any unconscious bias they have is written into the code. And so this research coming out of the US has shown that in trials, like modeling and trials, African-American people are hit far more frequently by an autonomous vehicle than a white person. So I think it's like going to open up a really interesting dilemma and really interesting implications for our technological industry. And I think that's really interesting at the same time as being like a really terrible outcome. So yeah, I'm interested to see where that all goes.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, Kitty. I suppose watch the space and we'll see where the technology leads us. Hey, I'd just like to finish on talking a little bit about equity and the just transition to more climate-friendly transport. Obviously, walking is free, as Peter's told us. At the moment, electric vehicles are still unaffordable for so many people. Biking is a bit more affordable, but even just the price of e-bikes and cargo bikes, do we see those prices coming down in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, it's a. I was actually going to cover that, but it fell off the list. I mean, one of our chairperson actually, his father does a lot of work with secondhand bikes, and pretty much gives them away. So there are a lot of bikes in the world. A lot of bikes, as kids grow up, quite often they find their way into landfill. So if there's incredible repurposing opportunities for bicycles. Unfortunately, human nature, you kind of want the best of the best sometimes, and there are some ridiculous amounts of money spent on bicycles. But that said, as I said before, there's real opportunities for repurposing older bikes, and I think there's opportunities there. Go Eco, I think, in Hamilton do a really good program. And it's something that we're looking into, as sort of encouraging the repurposing and making it easy for people to grab a bike, because it's just so easy once you've got that bike. Yeah,
we have four bikes in our family are all of the old bikes that I've converted to electric, and a typical kit is you can get a kit for about $1,000. So that if you want to buy an e-bike, it might be $4,000 to get a good one. So you could do it at a fraction of the price. So that's what I did with all of ours. And, my wife's one's up to nearly 6,000 kilometers of e-biking that would have been probably in a car. Mm. That shows, what the potential is.
Yeah, that's really interesting, eh? I know we've got the fee baits on electric vehicles. And the other thing is, we don't always have to own everything ourselves. We've got the scooters that we can hire, and I think that Hamilton City is looking at introducing bikes into that scheme as well. So there's always that option as well. I think we'll finish there. Thank you so much to the panelists for your time today. Much appreciated, and special thanks to the University of Waikato as well for enabling this conversation to take place. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Angela. It's great.
Thank you.
Ka kite.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yes.
The University of Waikato is proud to introduce the world's first Bachelor of Climate Change for the people who know there is no Planet B. Gain the skills needed for the jobs of tomorrow. Contribute to a fundamental shift in the way we do business and go about our lives. Explore how Mātauranga Māori can bring perspective to the most pressing issue of our time. Apply now and carve a career where passion and purpose collide.